This video is on society and depersonalization and how particularly modern society contributes to the sort of epidemic of depersonalization we're seeing, and kind of an epidemic in all sorts of mental problems ranging from anxiety to depression to personality disorders. How modern society contributes to this and how we as human beings really aren't evolved for the modern society in which we live. And there's a lot of aspects to this that could be addressed. I'm going to talk about the family situation, how the family situations we tend to find ourselves in are very strange relative to our evolutionary environments that we lived in. And everything from school to technology, how this all kind of leads to a dissociogenic culture. So, I talk about, if you watch a lot of my videos, I talk about how dysfunctional family systems contribute to depersonalization. They really lay the groundwork, in the majority of cases, the people with depersonalization. They lay the groundwork for dissociation in future life because they are essentially situations in which you find yourself in a sort of low-grade, traumatic context. You're in relationships and you're in a family system that is not adequate to meet the needs of you as a developing human self. So, a lot of times it's not because our parents are terrible. It's actually because if this had occurred in, let's say, thousands of years ago prior to agriculture, when we lived in tribal societies, let's say your parent had a psychological problem. Well, there would have been a lot of other people around. Okay, let's say you were in a tribe of 150 people, something like that, and you would have had aunts and uncles right there. You would have had wiser elders around, cousins around, the grandparents of your cousins. You would have lived in a dense tribal situation. Kids of all varying ages, so you would have had people the same age, people a little bit younger than you, very younger, people a little bit older, somewhat older, much older. You would have had an intergenerational kind of mix of people close by. So let's say your parent had a problem. Okay, so that would have been a negative attachment. But you would have had moderating attachment influences. You would have had a lot of other people to attach to that wouldn't have been dysfunctional, that you would have been able to develop functional relationships with. Okay, people from just a little bit older to you to the grandparents, and there would have been a checks and balance system on that dysfunctional parent. They wouldn't have been able to get away with the same things. And even if they kind of continued in their subtle abuse of you or not so subtle abuse of you, there would have been other adults around that you could consult with. Okay, so there would have been moderating attachment influences and a checks and balance system on a parent who was abusive to you. You would have been in a much healthier environment. Now, materially, we live in crazy times right now, especially if you're in the first or even second world. We're living in a world where we have material abundance from, we can eat food from all over the world. We've got, computers. You're watching this through a screen, and just everything. We can go on and on. We have all this great material abundance, but we have enormous deficits in social capital, you could call it. Okay, so social relationships, some sociologists call this social capital. We have a social capital deficit. And we're not living in that tribal context. So we find ourselves in nuclear families. This idea that you live with two parents, maybe a couple siblings, in a suburban home, or even an apartment or whatever, and you're pretty much cut off from your your family or your greater tribe. You don't even have a tribe. There's no tribe. The tribe is gone. You find yourself pretty much in relative isolation. Even if you're actually a fairly social person, we're still at a social deficit. I mean, we have no idea what tribal life is really like. Now, I'm not saying that it's great or that it's better in every way, but in terms of producing people that have a solid sense of self, kind of a bulwark against dissociation, our society is really bad. It promotes dissociation. So if you have a parent with a problem and you are in a nuclear home, you got a big problem because you're in basically a totalitarian system where that adult has a lot of power over who you are. And especially if you don't have a lot of other moderating attachment influences, not only does that adult have more power over you, but that attachment to that adult you have is going to be a much stronger influence on yourself as you develop. Okay, so there's that. Then we have the school system, which is really strange. The idea that you go to school and you're in this class with all people of the same age, this is just bizarre. Our school system is very bizarre. And your parents aren't around, so you can get bullied, and a lot of times people go to school and they may not know that many people. You can find yourself in situations where you're very vulnerable, and the school might be far away. This is just very bizarre. I remember thinking about all this stuff, and then I was reading something by an evolutionary kind of sociologist, David Sloan Wilson. He wrote a book called Evolution for Everyone. And I believe it is in that book, or maybe an article he wrote, where he talks about how this is just not evolutionarily appropriate. It's very strange in our school system. I mean, if you, in a tribal context, you would have people a little bit older than you, younger than you. The whole intergenerational spectrum would have been there. The whole age spectrum would have been in there. You would have been integrated into a tribe with an age system and with initiation rights. This sense that you're moving through time and developing as a person, and you have initiation rights that kind of mark a transition in your growth as a human being. We don't even have initiation rights. That's something that's also lacking. And I talk about, like, one of the things I talk about in my program is this sense of self through time. And a lot of times what happens is, one term for this is called self-constancy, right? You have a sense of self throughout time, and then things happen that disrupt your sense of self. You don't feel a contiguous sense of self throughout time. And I think initiation rites in tribal societies would help with feeling like, now you're a man, or now you're a woman, and kind of marking chronologically your growth as a human being, and you can look back and remember that, and that helps you develop a solid sense of self, along with the tribal context, the healthy web of relationships with all sorts of people. That would have helped defend against dissociation of all kinds. And if we want to talk about, more severe dissociative disorders like borderline personality or dissociative identity disorder, where, a parent might just be beating or physically, sexually abusing their kids. I mean, there would have been more checks and balances to stop this from going on in tribal societies. Okay. Now, tribal societies had a lot of warfare, right? A lot of people died. If you look back at human history, it's just battle, like constant warfare. But you're identified with your tribe, and the sense of camaraderie you would have had with a tribe of people that you ate with, celebrated with, had initiation rites with, that you fought with and lived with and shared resources with. That sense of camaraderie, man, as terrible as tribal society may be in some senses, that social cohesion and sense of self relating to a group, the strength of identity and the strength of connection you would have felt would have been amazing. Amazing to have, to feel that sense of purpose and sense of place in a tribal context is something that we in modern society, I mean, that's hard to grasp. I mean, maybe very like nationalistic societies can probably approximate that. But instead, we find ourselves socially isolated, socially atomized. You know, there's some statistic out there that Americans have, on average, 0.7 best friends or something like that. And who knows about the actual accuracy of that figure, but there is a lot of truth to the fact that we are very socially isolated. It's hard to make friends, especially if you have a very mobile society. You're moving around a lot. You know, you meet people that you like, but then you lose them, and then, you know, you find yourself having to deal with life a lot of times. Kind of, you feel like you're on your own. And in combination with the fact that we come from these nuclear families where if a parent has a problem, that is a big problem for you as the child, that parent. Does that mean that parent necessarily is a terrible person? Not really, because, you know, back in the day, like in tribal societies, like I said, there would have been more checks and balances. There would have been more moderating, beneficial, positive attachment influences. So, in a lot of ways, society, if you look at the greater context, really causes depersonalization. It causes a lot of psychological problems. You know, and you look at all these therapies like, you know, you just look at all these therapies like CBT, where everything is just about your thoughts and exposure. And then you kind of look at our evolutionary history and you just go, man, a lot of these therapies we have are so myopic. They're so short-sighted and narrow in focus that they don't address the whole context of what a human being is, what it means to be mentally healthy, and how that would have occurred in our evolutionary history. It wasn't because, you know, people did CBT exercises. Now, there is a lot of truth to CBT, and I'm kind of picking on that. One psychotherapeutic technique, but I think CBT is great when applied right. I think it can be one part of a general recovery program for people with depersonalization. But when you take this greater context of what it meant for our ancestors to be a self and to develop, you start realizing that our modern society can take a lot of the blame for the depersonalization epidemic. And I mean, it's kind of one of the things that when I had depersonalization, I was thinking about all of this, and I was kind of reading all of the relevant literature or all the stuff that claims to be the depersonalization literature. You just realize that you have to take a look at the greater context of what it means to be a human being. And so, yeah, society is very dissociogenic. And, you know, we could really talk about capitalistic society. I mean, capitalistic society is really, I mean, it promotes insecurity, because if you think about it, you know, the whole thing is to get us to feel insecure, like, oh, we need to have all these items that we don't really need because we're insecure. You know, it's a big part of the marketing to make you insecure, to buy all this shit so you can impress people, because that's what the advertising has brainwashed you to believe. And then all the government policies, and now, you know, I mean, we're basically ruled over by a bunch of rich people that have all the money, that can pay off all the politicians. And, you know, our whole media is controlled by a tiny little clique of billionaires. And I mean, I could just go rant on the negative elements of society, but modern society really, really promotes depersonalization. You got to take steps. You got to take steps to develop social connections with people. Because one big part of depersonalization is traumatic isolation. We get traumatized, and so we isolate. Okay, we isolate. And like I talk about, disorganized attachment is one of the big causes of depersonalization, and then the dysfunctional family systems. You need to understand the very particulars of your family situation, and it's also not just the family situation, but really kind of the societal situation. So how your family system interacts with other family systems, how your family system acted as a home base for you to go off and explore the environment, school, and things like that, and then to come back, and how that didn't adequately meet your needs as a developing human being, growing through time, and all those sorts of things. And you need to understand the social deficits you had and work against that. Because we have this material abundance, and we're kind of told that in our society, well, everything is just about money and possessions. And we're not taught about the value of relationships so much. It's more about money, get a good job, even don't even reproduce, just get a good job and work, and we tell women that too, that like, oh, all that stuff about having kids and everything. No, just have a career, and it's just money, get money. But, like I've traveled to the third world, and I mean, like a lot of times you'll see kids on the street and they have it terrible, right? And they might die of some disease, and they have there's they're not going to be able to afford to go to a hospital or anything like that. But one of the things you notice is they have a lot of relatives around. And even if they are on the street, they have more social capital, let's say, than someone who has a lot more money living in a suburban area, but all alone, getting verbally abused, maybe bullied at school. Oh yeah, they've got an iPad. It's like, yeah, sorry your parents abused you and you had a fucking terrible childhood, but here's an iPad. Hopefully that makes you feel good. That's not... People need to grasp that the socio-emotional brain, the social and the emotional, leads to depersonalization. It's the quality, and particularly attachment therapists talk about the quality of the emotional attunement that a child gets in its earliest years. That, the value and the quality of that emotional attunement will determine the resilience and the emotional security, the security of the self of that developing person in the later years. But we're not really taught that in our society. It's just about money. So if you have a nice house, you got it better off, which isn't true. Someone can come from that nice situation and have all these self-defeating tendencies. You see this all the time. People come from a quote-unquote good family and they just sabotage their whole fucking life away. They sabotage all their advantages, and they might develop like chemical dependencies, various drug problems, depression, anxiety, depersonalization, personality disorders, and they just don't have a sense of self and agency and taking action and emotional resilience and all these things. I mean, I remember I've been in third world countries. One time I was in this cafe, and it was actually pretty nice, and I could tell the woman that ran it had some money, and she had a kid, and the kid must have been like 5 years old or something. He was actually playing on an iPad, and I was kind of sitting there. I think I was reading a book or something. I was there for an hour or so, and then I kind of kept looking at how the mother was relating to that kid. The kid there were no other friends around. He was just there on his iPad, right? So he had no social relationships, but he had an iPad. And his mother was just saying things to him, and it was just the tone of her voice. I almost cringed. It was like so... She was just kind of guilt-tripping him for he's just a kid sitting there, and she was saying all these things to him that were really kind of attacking him. And you look at this kid, and he's got an iPad, but he's alone, and he's got this mother that's basically verbally abusing him. But then you've got these kids on the street, right? They're much poorer, but they can at least, they have more social freedom. They can walk around, and they've got more friends. They've got more adults around. They have better social relationships. Now, of course, a lot of terrible things happen to them all the time too. But I don't know. It's this weird situation where a lot of times the having the better material circumstances is a trade-off between the better social circumstances, And I remember just seeing that and just thinking, man, you're just seeing a poor kid in the process of having his self just kind of beaten out of him by this parent that has total influence over that person's, growth as a human being. And I mean, and technology, we can talk about technology. I mean, it's a great way to connect. Like right now, I'm connecting with you as you're watching this through a screen and the internet. And the internet does have these advantages, But I mean, it really alienates us, and we have to take steps to at least overcome some elements of the dissociogenic aspects of our culture and our society. And particularly relationships, healthy, functional relationships are the sustenance of life in a lot of ways. Of course, your money is important, right? And of course, your health is important and everything. But we absolutely have to develop a web of healthy, functional relationships and break out of traumatic isolation if you're currently in a state of isolation, and really break out of the social anxiety a lot of people have. Really develop deep friendships with people. And it's a big task. It's a big task, it may actually be easier to get a lot of money than to have a lot of great friendships in this society. But you've got to take steps to do it. So that's the video for today. Society that we live in, the modern society we live in, is very dissociogenic in many ways, and you got to take steps to live a healthy, functional life. So that's the video. Take care.